This on. Hello! I'd like to request that everybody starts to take their seats. I'm going to just stand up here and keep talking until we start to get people filtering in. You guys in the back! This is definitely a space where it's not going to work to have people continuing the party while we do the session. So I'm going to have to keep trying to. I can't make the bell noises with my voice, and you don't want me to try. This is actually my job tonight. I just stand up here and try to get people to sit down. If you could please filter in, there's plenty of seats, or there's some seats. I think we're going to get started. Actually, you're in danger of not getting a seat if you don't filter in. All right. Welcome all, everyone. That wasn't a cue for me, that's good. Welcome, everyone. I'm Matthew Herper. I'm the editorial director of events here at STAT. We're so thrilled to see so many of you here. It's just fantastic, and we're going to plunge right into an evening of content. We've got Peter Marks from the FDA coming up. We've got an amazing panel on what's next in biotech. But do we just break a glass? That's good luck. So first, to get us started, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jacob Aptekar, Vice President, Trial Design Solutions Lead at Metadata AI, Dassault Systems.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Welcome to this event and to the STAT team for hosting. Thank you to the New York City Economic Development Corporation for co-sponsoring with Dassault Systèmes. This is my first year as an attendee of the JPM conference and as a representative of Dassault, and I'm happy to share a few thoughts to begin the evening. One of the important ways that value gets created in our industry is at events like JPM where the elements of our ecosystem interact. Most new medicines start in a government-funded lab, then an academic publication, then a small company backed by private investors before going to trial participants at sites all over the world, to the public market and to government regulators, and finally, if they're successful, to a large company with the capacity to deliver these medicines to patients at scale. At Metadata, we see ourselves as the stewards of this process, helping to collect the data that supports new medicines as they make this journey. And tonight's panelists represent this ecosystem, from the companies that back these innovations, to the cities that provide the venues for these interactions, to the regulators who ensure that the innovation does not outstrip patient safety or benefit. Science is our store of value. Our collective mission is to find the few truly beneficial discoveries among a nearly infinite haystack of dead ends, first using model systems, then through human experimentation, and finally through proven benefit in the real world. Ultimately, it's these experiments, the evidence, and the new scientific knowledge that's generated that moves our industry forward. At Metadata, we not only help to collect and store the data from these experiments, but we also provide the valuable context that helps bring these drugs to market. And AI presents new opportunities for us to do this complex work better. AI makes it easier for us to collect and master data from many places. Today we're doing this work by using wearable devices, collecting data in doctors' offices, using the health record, and relying more on decentralized tools like smartphones to get information directly from patients. AI makes it easier to run the right trial, to test more possibilities in a simulation before testing them in people. Today, we're able to predict which patients are the most likely to enroll in trials, to receive treatment, to suffer adverse events, and to expect a positive treatment response. We use that information to design better protocols and also to address the individualized needs that keep patients as safe as possible. And finally, AI will accelerate the production and sharing of scientific knowledge. We use AI to place new evidence in the context of the scientific record and to highlight for regulators and the market where and how new medicines truly surpass what is currently available. Today at Metadata, we are providing evidence for new medicines based on historical trial data, on synthetic data, as part of regulatory filings, conference presentations, and peer-reviewed publications. So what are some predictions for the year ahead? I'll start with the cell and gene therapy space because that's relevant to what you'll soon be hearing from Director Peter Marks, and close to much of the work our team at Metadata has pursued this year. We have an unprecedented ability to produce medicines with cell and gene therapy, but a very small amount of clinical data. The opportunity we see this year is to leverage AI to learn from our collective clinical experience in this space how to position and target these therapies safely in clinical populations with high unmet medical need. And next, I want to address the expansion of clinical development beyond the traditional centers of excellence. It's clear that whether the pressure is coming from regulators, patient groups, or market forces, there's a tremendous demand and need to move clinical development out of the traditional institutions and into the community. It's a scientific imperative to run trials in more diverse populations and in care settings that reflect where medicines will actually be used, particularly for chronic diseases. Medicines need to be tested in the way that care is actually delivered, and the movement of the clinical infrastructure into software enables that transition. So thanks again to the moderators, the panelists, and you all for coming this evening. We hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try to run through this quickly. So I assume I don't need to tell you guys to subscribe to the newsletter, right? Everybody is, if you're not, it's where we put our best jokes in addition to lots of good content. A reminder, I don't know if you all know this space is a transformer. Right now, we're going to have an amazing session. It's obviously a party space, but during the day between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. for the next 2 days, this is a co-working space. Once registered, you have access to this space to work, take meetings, and network. There's coffee and snacks. The QR code on the screen here will lead you to the registration page. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by the STAT registration table and chat with one of our team members. There have been some STAT reporters hanging out here. Not me, I'm at the Westin, but some of my colleagues. Speaking of my colleagues, Adam Forrestein, who you're going to hear from in a bit, has a new thing coming this March, exclusively for STAT Plus subscribers. He'll be launching a new weekly newsletter bringing his unfiltered and uncompromising analysis of the biotech industry straight into your inbox. So sign up today to join the list and to receive Adam's Biotech scorecard. Registered attendees will receive a link to sign up in the thank you note from STAT following this event. And speaking of other STAT things, if you like this, we have more big events, and we have our summits, which are all-day affairs. The Breakthrough Summit East will be returning to New York City on March 21st. Join us to hear executive, industry experts, patient advocates, scientists discuss how new technologies and tools are aiming to improve patients' lives. We have some speakers to announce already. Feng Zhang from the Broad Institute, who seems to be founding a company about every week at this point. Kimberly Smith from Vive Healthcare, Dr. Mikhail Dolson from Pfizer, and I'm really excited. I'll be interviewing Kathy Giusti, who should be a legend here from the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation originally. Really important, a lot of drug development, has some new stories and new things to tell. So, again, thank you for being here. I hope you really enjoy the content. Hope you can stick around for more drinks afterward. The bar will reopen. Let's get to the program. We'd like to give a big thank you to our presenting sponsor, Dassault Systèmes, and our supporting sponsor, the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And with that, for a spotlight session from our supporting sponsor, I'd like to welcome to the stage Susan Rosenthal, SVP of Life Sciences and Healthcare at the New York City Economic Development Corporation.
Let's check, is this on? Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you to the STAT team. This is a phenomenal event. It's a beautiful space, too. Thank you for having me here today. So I'm Sue Rosenthal. I am a Senior Vice President of Life Sciences at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And at EDC, we spur economic growth by investing in what we refer to as industries of the future. And I probably don't need to tell everybody here, but what better industry of the future than life sciences? Our mission is to make New York City a global leader in life sciences, so we've dedicated over $1 billion to advance innovation that translates into companies, jobs, medicines, and advanced technologies. And we've even seen some of them already. Medidata was up here just now. I think that's a great example. We also just announced the CZ BioHub that's coming to New York. We also see investors coming, like Two Bear Capital that just expanded to New York City. And so, actually, we've observed over the past few years that New York City is emerging in that intersection of advanced technologies and life sciences, which we're starting to see being called more and more tech bio, as opposed to biotech. It's a little bit of a reverse in those names. And I'll come back to that a little bit more in a moment. So one of our strengths also lies in the strong clusters that we're continuing to build throughout the 5 boroughs. And specifically, I want to call out the heart of our ecosystem in Kips Bay, the Kips Bay Science District. It's home to the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences, which I think has something like 50 to 60 companies currently, like Calliope or Synavia or Immunai, home to NYU, and also thinking about Deerfield's Cure, which I mentioned, Tech Bio has their lab of the future that's focused on AI. And I want to make this personal. You think about the connections that you make. I used to work right there at Pfizer's headquarters on 42nd Street, which has now moved a bit. But I can say it's really cool to see this area blooming in life sciences. I know from having been at those cool restaurants like Street Taco or the roof deck at Pod 39, that's where you're going to bump into people. You think of those collisions for life sciences as that's where I'm going to find my colleague that I'll know knows how to do an IND, or someone that knows how to do their CMC strategy. You're going to start bumping into those people as you visit Kips Bay more and more. It's soon to be home to the Science Park and Research Campus in Kips Bay. It's a first of its kind life sciences and health-focused jobs and education innovation hub. It'll bring together secondary and higher education with industry and public health institutions that are essential to spin out that next generation of talent, that next generation of substrate, and those next companies that we'll see growing. And we have huge support from Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul. So we're forming this once-in-a-generation opportunity to redevelop an entire block in Kips Bay. It's a blank slate. And so, I think about this as a born and bred New Yorker. I see my city establishing this campus. It's going to bring the pipeline from the public education system through to being able to work at these companies. I think of my career. I started my career as an intern at NIH. Do you guys remember your internship or that mentor that you worked for that really inspired you to go into this industry? Imagine the student at CUNY or at NYU that's starting their career at Lexio or at Intervace or at Alexandria in Kips Bay, and then meeting others like you for a coffee or a corned beef sandwich at 2nd Avenue Deli, and talking about your experiments, your business development opportunity, your next deal. These are the collisions that we're trying to create in the Innovation Science District in Kips Bay. And so we've recently announced a master plan for this Science Park and Research Campus, Kips Bay. And soon we're going to release a call for proposals, a call for a request for expressions of interest is the formal term for it. It's for an entity to serve as an anchor for that campus. So keep your eyes out for that coming online soon. And through that, we invite, specifically thinking about Tech Bio, which I mentioned earlier, Tech Bio firms to become part of this shared vision to bolster the life sciences ecosystem in Kips Bay and really become this center of gravity for life sciences in New York City. Help us shape the future of life sciences, help us shape New York City, and stay connected. Reach out to EDC anytime to learn more about what we're doing and the growth that we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. For our first session this evening, I'm thrilled to welcome Adam Feuerstein, Senior Writer for Biotech at STAT, and Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Dr. Marks, welcome. Thank everybody for being here. Great crowd. If some of you, like me, flew here on a Boeing 737 MAX 9, congratulations on making it. I was actually mid-air when my phone dinged with the alert saying that those planes are being grounded, and I had a window seat, so I'm like cinched the seatbelt, like praying. But I made it. So, anyway, Dr. Marks, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So, I have called you the most important and controversial drug regulator in the world. But I've never asked you whether that's justified.
It's not true.
What part is not true?
A, I'm not the most important, and B, I hope I'm not the most controversial, but, we try to do things based on good science, and I'd like to think that isn't the most controversial, although if there
But people are hanging on every word that you've got some really important decisions that you've made and that you will be making. So that's why I feel like your role is so important at the FDA.
Yeah, well, I think the piece that's important for us is to make sure that we are helping to move development forward for product. I think the transformation that I think we've had at FDA over the past decade, especially in the Center for Biologics, is from kind of a more passive role of applications come in and we thumbs up, thumbs down them, to really understanding that we have a role to play in the ecosystem to try to help move things forward and to try to help foster innovation, in part through some of the regulatory innovation that we can use to help move things forward. I think gene therapy is a great example of a place where there's a lot of room for regulatory innovation, which actually makes it fun to do what we do, because it's not just just putting the same small molecule through the paces again. It's actually thinking about paradigms that are different, because gene therapies, vector-based products, when you think about it, CRISPR-Cas9 products, they are a very different model than small molecule or even protein-based drug development.
So let's, what you brought up, gene editing and the CRISPR. Obviously, December we had the first approval of a CRISPR-based medicine, Casgevy, and sickle cell disease. And I wonder, maybe just comment just briefly on that. I mean, there's been a lot of written, including by myself, about that. But I thought what's interesting is what impact or precedent you think Casgevy has set for other developers of CRISPR, based medicines.
Well, I think look, to see something move from the first published papers and just over a decade later, 11, 12 years later, to actually have a product that's based on that system. And this isn't like someone conceived of a product and this is that they discovered, the good news is there was genome editing beforehand, and CRISPR-Cas9 built on that. I think having this product now and getting experience with it, it will be for not a massive size population, but a modestly large potential population. Probably 10, 20,000 people eligible for it, and how that will how you'll see people getting the adenoviral vector versus the CRISPR-Cas9 edited product. I don't know how that's going to divide out, but with that experience, I think we'll start to have safety data that will hopefully lead to more confidence in using genome editors in humans.
And on the safety side, obviously there was a lot of emphasis on and debate and discussion during the panel about off-target editing, and I wonder if is that going to renew itself each time one of these products makes it to the FDA, or do you think that cumulatively you will be less concerned about that?
I think we're now once you've done this once, twice, three, each time you do it, you understand better how to actually characterize these off-target effects. I think there's two things. A, we understand how to better characterize and what we expect for the characterization. But I think the other thing is, as we see the next generation, CRISPR-Cas9, we've now evolved to having base editors and now prime editors, some of which are being engineered to have fewer and fewer off-target effects. That may also help us in this. So I think it's a really exciting time to see this, especially because when you think about these things as platforms, what's exciting to me is that if you have CRISPR-Cas9 as a platform and a delivery vehicle, it may be some of these will be virally delivered, some of them will probably be delivered with lipid nanoparticles, some of them may be for cell-based ones electroporated in. But the point here is that you really only have to focus now on the part of the molecule that's changing, the guide, and that actually allows us to really, it frees up a lot of energy for sponsors because the manufacturing can take advantage of platform technologies. And as far as our efforts at FDA, it allows us to really think about potential off-target effects and manage them.
Mm-hmm. So I want to say one more safety question before we get to gene therapy, which I know everybody wants me to talk about. CAR T, cell therapy. Obviously, we've got this recent concern investigation the FDA has started about secondary cancers. Tell us a little bit more. Where are we with that? What's sort of next?
Yeah.
And I think interestingly, is there any potential concern in autoimmune diseases? Because I think we're seeing a lot of interest moving CAR T into autoimmune disease.
So we're early on in this. This is something that over the past couple of months we started to get in cases that were reported. How many of the 22 cases that were reported as of December 31st truly represent secondary malignancies, and how many may just be, I'm a hematologist oncologist, people with lymphoma, they get other lymphomas. And so we have to sort that out. The one way we have a pretty good sense that there's a relationship is when someone does sequencing of the malignant clone and they find the chimeric antigen receptor in that clone in all of the cells or in nearly all of the cells of that clone. That makes you think that something probably happened. Now, we don't have that data for very many, but in a couple, we do have it. So we know that at least in some cases, it probably did relate to the genetic modification. And nobody here should be shocked, because the CAR T cell generations we have now, they often have 5, 10 copies of the CAR that's been that have integrated in, and the CARs tend to go when you use a lenti or a retroviral vector, they tend to go into active spots in the genome. So it shouldn't shock us. All of that said, something that has just as a crude rate here, and we don't know that this will be what it'll be. You had a couple cases probably that are truly related with 27,000 plus treatments. That rate is pretty small. So I think that's why we are pretty clear that the risk-benefit is still very much in use in the lymphoma area. Your point is really well taken. We still are going to have to learn some more in the autoimmune area. I think we've kind of put a little bit of a yellow light and set a little bit of caution here till we figure this out some more. But it'll be a risk-benefit, because many of the autoimmune diseases that CAR T cells are being thought of to treat are really bad diseases that are also alternatively treated with chemotherapies, some of which are associated with higher rates of secondary malignancies than we've seen with the CAR T cells.
So we should think about autoimmune in terms of the severity of the autoimmune disease.
I think that's right, and I think I think for right now this should not knock autoimmune diseases out of the running. I do think, just for those who might be in this area, we'll get our act together. Right now, there's different products that are in different states of development, and different review teams haven't fully coordinated what they've told companies. We'll get that fixed in the next couple of weeks. But I think there's, again, for more serious diseases, not a big issue. I think as we're thinking about less serious applications, the use in less serious diseases, we may be thinking of a different approach in the in the CAR T, of using perhaps genome editing to put the CAR in a given location in the genome, which is kind of a more elegant way of doing it that may reduce this issue.
So gene therapy.
Yes. You
believe accelerated approval is appropriate for gene therapies. You you've said many times, you think that can save lives.
I think it can, yes.
Just give us your view on that. And of course, I mean, sort of looming all over this is the Sarepta, the accelerated approval of Sarepta's gene therapy for Duchenne.
Yeah. So let me just back it up. For gene therapies. So what are we doing? This is not the case all the time, but at least some of the time we have a situation where you know what gene you're working on, right? Mm-hmm. You know what protein then is either present insufficient amounts or too much. And you can hopefully create some model system in an animal model where you can replace that using a gene therapy, or you can look at the natural situation in humans, because in some genetic diseases, there are humans that have reduced levels of a protein where it's not absent, but they're normal. And so if you can make the connection between getting a gene therapy expressed in a human in the right target tissue to that same level as an animal model, or is in a human who's not affected or minimally affected, you have what we need to reasonably likely predict that you're going to have clinical benefit. Would we like to have better clinical, evidence of clinical benefit? Yeah, it's nice when you can have things like we have in sickle cell disease, where you have, it works out very easily. But for many of the rare diseases, we don't have natural history that is definitive, and trying to get that has really slowed down the field. In some cases, it's also because the diseases just progress. The neurodegenerative diseases take years to actually get to those endpoints. So using accelerated approval is a way that we can get there, where we may not be right. In fact, we were kind of having a conversation earlier today. We shouldn't be right 100% of the time, because if we were right 100% of the time, it wouldn't be called accelerated approval. It would be called early traditional approval, and because we'd be right 100% of the time.
So there's a risk that you will grant accelerated approval to a gene therapy that ultimately may not benefit patients.
That's correct.
And that's okay.
I think as long as we make sure that we do the right job for safety, and as long as we have that only happen sometimes, very small amount of time, with 5%.
Yeah, I was like, can you define what that is? What is there a percentage? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Like, what is there a number?
I'd like my target to be that we're at least 90%, but 95% would be better. But
you want to be statistically significantly correct.
Significant, right? I want to be 2 standard deviations from the mean.
Okay.
Anyway, but I think that's, and I can actually say that with a straight face, because I feel better saying that to the mother or father of a child with a rare genetic disease that's going to take that child's life within 4 or 5 years, that potentially we can get a therapy to them a couple years sooner and potentially save their life, than say, well, sorry, but we're going to have to do a natural history study for 3 or 4 years so that we can do a controlled trial, et cetera. So, because look, if we're wrong, especially in this rare disease space, the implications are we could be wrong. We could be wrong for, it may be that the therapy does work, but the clinical trial just didn't show it. So I think this is a way of trying to advance this, and I'm not going to lose any sleep at night, because at the end of the day, we will taking this approach, I am convinced we will save more lives than otherwise.
So with Elevidys, the Sarepta gene therapy, everyone, as is well known, you sort of overruled, or you disagreed with your staff who felt like the product should not have been approved. You thought, for reasons that partly that you just elucidated, that it should be. And I wonder, you made that decision knowing that the confirmatory study was underway and that the results were going to be reading out imminently. Those results have read out, and the study technically did not work.
But I can't. It's very hard for me, because we're in this area.
This is a weird. I know, right? Yes.
Because we have an application under consideration, so we really can't discuss that piece. But I can say this: I'm not going to lose. Let's talk about This is a wise attorney at FDA once told me how to do this, so I'm going to do it.
Okay.
We're not
He's
gonna
got
talk about
he's
any
got lawyer's
specific-
advice. This is
we're-
not
we're
good for us.
We're not going to talk about any specific product. But hypothetically, if you had a product that used an aggregate scale, and all of the components of that aggregate scale looked pretty good, or nearly all of them looked pretty good, but the aggregate, for various reasons, didn't come out perfectly, we approve products based on that. I can tell you from experience when I was in industry, there was a product called Defercerox, which is an oral iron chelator, which really failed. It really miserably failed its primary endpoint, but it met every secondary endpoint.
But I feel like with Sarepta is sort of like the kid who plays soccer in Brooklyn. That it doesn't matter if they win, they'll get a trophy anyway.
Wow.
And
okay.
so like the FDA is sort of treating Sarepta
They
like
didn't
that.
play soccer in my neighborhood in Brooklyn.
So
I
I
grew
just
up
feel
in
like that's how
Flatbush.
FDA treats Sarepta.
By the
that
way, thank
they
you
don't,
for sponsoring this, New York.
They like it doesn't matter if they win or not. So and I guess just but even a broader question like, does it matter that clinical trials hit their pre-specified primary endpoint in gene therapy?
No. I mean, of course it does. We'd like them to meet their pre-specified endpoints, but we are allowed to have some regulatory flexibility, and especially in the case where, to me, again, the way I think about this, it goes back to the science. It's a foundational question. Did this thing actually work, right? There are statistical constructs that are one thing, but scientific ones of, is the thing actually working? And so as we think about any gene therapy, that's actually the crucial thing. The foundational issue is the product actually working? And hopefully we can design the statistical endpoints correctly, but we don't always get it right.
Everyone's looking at you. We're like, what's he going to do about Sarepta's decision? We're trying to. I'm looking. Are your eyes twitching? Are you going to confirm the approval in the 4 and 5-year-olds? Are you going to expand it for the 6 and 7-year-olds?
We'll have to see. We'll have to see what our reviewers do.
Can you say anything about the timeline for that review? I know obviously Sarepta has submitted the paperwork for final approval.
What I can tell you, and this is because of our commitment to the Duchenne's community, we're going to move as quickly as we can, and we're not focused on goal dates. We're focused on getting the quality review done. So I can't tell you exactly when, obviously, but we're going to just do it as quickly as we can for the patients.
And in terms of just on a broader issue about gene therapy, I know you've taken the view that that part of the FDA's position and your position is that you're concerned about just overall about, particularly in rare diseases, about whether or not there's the right foundation to sort of develop these therapies. And you've made some steps, and there are some programs that you're initiating within the FDA to sort of help foster the development of gene therapies for rare diseases.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've unfortunately, you look at what barriers you have that are allowing you to proceed, and accelerated approval. One of the issues the other nice thing about accelerated approval is, to the extent that we can provide companies with regulatory certainty for a pathway, that is, my deputy director can put out a guidance on how to do this with, Julie Tierney, who's in the audience. She can put out a guidance on how to develop rare disease gene therapy through accelerated approval. That helps create regulatory certainty, and hopefully that makes investors feel more comfortable that there's a path forward. So that's one piece. There's another piece which has been a real bear, which is that the regulatory environment in different countries has evolved in different ways. And when you're putting forward a glib or a thing that's going to be used in hundreds of thousands of people, it's easy for companies to try to satisfy the different regulatory requirements because cheap at the price, to do extra studies. For these rare disease gene therapies, what it means is it's a complete non-starter if someone has to go back and do a whole new study for manufacturing or another clinical farm tox study in different countries. So we're going to try to get to better harmonization across the globe, especially in high-income countries, because it would be really nice if you do one application and it can serve.
And that's a model that's sort of oncology that Rick Pazder's been using,
Rick Pazder's been using it, and it works very well. And we're trying to extend it even further to include the European Medicines Agency. And if that works, it immediately, I mean, just think about it. Your net present value calculations, you can just add like, you just if you have Japan and the EU for many of these, you multiply by 2 to 3. So that actually can take something that is not viable and make it viable. I owe it to good business development people. I don't know anything about these, but these net present value calculations always keep people up at night.
NPV, just call it.
NPV.
Just say that word.
Well,
and
I try not.
people-
They're teaching me in the kind of federal government school to try not to use acronyms these days.
Well, I call it something. I call it GLIPs. I don't know, like GLP-1. I'm a GLIP one guy. That's a Wall Street way of thinking. So just back to AA for a second, accelerated approval for a second. Obviously the flip side of accelerated approval is if and when products don't work, and this has come up in oncology. There's steps taken to withdraw those products from the market.
Right.
Easier said than done. And I wonder, maybe particularly, is it harder in gene therapy maybe to withdraw a product? And is that something that the FDA is willing to do?
Yeah, so I don't think it's actually going to be harder because the hard thing in oncology is you sometimes have patients on the drug that you then have to pull. That's really always very challenging because people will say, well, I'm benefiting from it. In the gene therapy world, these are one and done, so if we decide that there's not clinical benefit, we can just say, look, time to stop. I don't have any problem with that. And I think we'll see. We're trying to get some practice now with withdrawing stuff from the market more easily using our new authorities that were recently granted, and hopefully that will work. Again, I'm involved in one of those, can't say more about it, but we'll try to make sure that we can
I should say, out of fairness, that as sort of like, I'm kidding you about the Sarepta stuff, but I mean, with in ALS instance, I know that there's been a lot of controversy over a certain product, stem cell product, Neuron in ALS that you guys obviously decided not to approve. And
but there again, we have a commitment to the ALS community. We'll continue to work with that sponsor, and they seem to be committed towards trying to design a trial that will show benefit. Our reviewers are committed to working with them, and hopefully it will work out, and they'll demonstrate benefit. There's nothing more than we'd like to see, right? But we can only work based on the data that we have, and although we have a certain amount of latitude, it's like the rubber band analogy. We can stretch, but at a certain point we can't go further because it breaks.
So, just question on patient advocacy, patient groups. Obviously, they're very vocal. They're very influential. They've been influential in Duchenne. They've been influential in ALS in particular. Too influential. Like, how do you balance? Obviously addressing their needs and make sure that their point of view is heard versus your role as kind of being an independent regulator and sometimes having to have some hard conversations.
Yeah. So I think we obviously want to have a patient focus, right? So we're always willing to listen, but I think there are these hard conversations where there are patient advocacy groups that desperately want a therapy, where if all evidence shows that therapy doesn't work, we can't break the rubber band. The truth is, I think patient advocates have been very helpful in helping to educate us as to the pressing need. And I think, much like for companies, they bring in patients that help motivate people to get their jobs done because they hear the tremendous suffering that's going on. I think that's what patient advocates can do for us and how they can be very helpful to us. I think they're particularly helpful early on in the drug development process because they can help us figure out what are the endpoints that make the most sense, what bothers patients the most. And I do think you're right. I'm going to acknowledge that at the end, it's very challenging when you come to the advisory committee and it's a bit of a challenge. But overall, it's something that we've come to accept, and it's an important part of the process.
So we haven't talked about vaccines at all. I'm going to end with a vaccine question, COVID vaccine question. The myocarditis, sorry, couldn't get that word out, seems like a real side effect for the COVID vaccine, and where is the data on that, and do we need to see more data on that?
So myocarditis, we have actually data on hundreds of thousands of people in terms of the risk. There is probably a small increased risk of myocarditis, particularly in younger individuals, males, probably age 16 to 30. It's actually much reduced now that we're not giving 2 doses of vaccine 3 to 4 weeks apart. And compared to the risk of myocarditis with COVID-19, it's very much reduced. But the most important thing, though, that's happened is that with the megaphone of social media and everything, this myocarditis risk in a small fraction of the population, probably most significant in 16 to 24-year-old males, which is mild myocarditis. This is not myocarditis that used to happen with the smallpox vaccine, where people ended up in intensive care units. This is where people end up needing to take some ibuprofen and be monitored for a couple months by a doctor just to make sure it gets better and they go about their daily life as normal. You know, what's happened is that gets to be the reason why an 80-year-old who has an incredible chance of dying if they get COVID and they're unvaccinated doesn't get vaccinated. And so we really have blown some of these. I mean, people have medical products occasionally have side effects. This is a relatively uncommon side effect. It's a mild one. We in the United States cannot find a single death, despite the fact that you might see on social media claims of deaths from myocarditis. We at CDC and FDA have not been able to find a single death attributable to myocarditis.
I mean, what we see on Twitter is not true? Really?
You know what? You should look at my email box, and then you'll know the truth. But all kidding aside, I mean, this is what you're bringing up here is one of the tremendous challenges. Really, one of the issues our commissioner has highlighted, that we have a world now which is really very challenging to deal with in basic public health measures. It's wonderful to talk about gene therapies and how we're going to lean in there, but it's highly problematic that incredibly simple public health measures that can help keep us safe from measles, even and other infectious diseases have gone by the wayside because of kind of really magical thinking. These things actually work. Vaccination, you know, and then some people like, oh, isn't this like new stuff? Vaccination dates back to the 1700s. And yes, it's true, the mRNA vaccines are a new way of getting there, but they're not that new. So hopefully, you know, people will come to some more comfort level with this. I hope we can make some progress getting people vaccinated, kids and adults. The flu vaccine, I mean, I'm the first to admit, flu vaccine and COVID-19 vaccine rates this year are pretty dismal, despite the fact that the COVID-19 vaccine is reasonably effective against the currently circulating JN1 variant. So go figure.
You and I have a little bit in common, that we're both loved and hated, no matter what we do.
It's okay. It's okay. If
Your
I know
email and my Twitter replies.
You know,
so
it helps get my blood pressure.
pressure.
I can sometimes have low blood pressure, so in the morning when I get the hate mail, it keeps it up.
Oh, I know what that's like.
A little bit. Yeah.
I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Dr. Peter Marks, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right. Please welcome to the stage Jacob Aptekar, MD, PhD, Vice President, Trial Design Solutions Lead, Metadata AI, Dassault Systems, and Afra Shafqat, PhD, Senior Data Scientist 2, Metadata AI, Dassault Systems, for a sponsored fireside chat. Welcome to both of you. So, it's great to have you both here, and again, thank you for the sponsorship. We, Metadata's got a really proud history. I actually got to see it up close, and I knew the founders and wrote about them longer ago than I'd like to admit. And really, the company helped move clinical trials online more than a decade ago. So now we're living in an age when generative AI could be the next thing to change clinical trials. what opportunities do we see? What is it that you guys think you'll be able to do? Do you want to start, Afra?
Sure. So similar to how generative AI models that are trained on millions of images can generate high-quality synthetic images, when these models are trained on clinical trial data, you can actually generate high-quality synthetic patient data such that these synthetic patient data sets are able to capture the insights into patient data as well as the patterns within the real data set, while not being restricted by the limitations of real data when it comes to patient privacy regarding their sensitive information, as well as proprietary information that may be locked within a clinical trial data set.
So that's really cool and a great idea, like being able to actually make a clinical trial in your computer. What do you use that for? I mean, I don't think we're probably close to the point where we would actually use that instead of a clinical trial, right, Jacob?
So typically, we use the data either to design better trials, so to come up with experiments that are more likely to succeed. And that can be simple, like deciding how to calibrate an endpoint. Some of these composite endpoints that Director Marks was talking about, exactly choosing the right endpoint for a particular drug that's going to show the greatest benefit.
So you don't miss on the primary and everything else worked.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other way that we use it is to provide context. So, and I mean, actually, the examples that he was providing are really good examples, but they're often patient populations that are very unique, very difficult to find, maybe are not well represented in the literature, maybe what's in the literature isn't a good representation of how they were treated in the trial, or often something we see now is that the standard of care moves. So, how patients were treated for a variant of lung cancer 10 years ago before checkpoint inhibitors is very different than today.
Right, taxanes versus Keytruda, right?
Exactly, right. So in patients who are checkpoint inhibitor naive versus experienced, and so when you want to supplement your regulatory filings with data, that's another way that we use those data sets.
I mean, you guys actually talk about things like virtual twins and a virtual heart. I mean, can you explain a little bit about how you would do that, how you would actually have a virtual patient or virtual organ simulated at this point?
Sure. So the idea is that the virtual twin of an organ, such as the heart, can really capture how a heart works, such that you're able to then simulate.
But what's that mean? You're building a virtual twin of the heart. What is that? What goes into that?
So there are parameters from that are collected from patients, as well as these physics-based models that have tried to model the structural properties of the heart, let's say, as well as the flow dynamics to really calculate how a heart functions pretty much. And what we're really doing there is that given these models that are able to then create a validated model for how a heart works, you can then simulate how that heart, or any organ for that matter, would respond to a treatment, like a drug treatment as well as a medical device, for example. And this is something that we have been able to do at DISO through the Living Heart Project, where we created, through a collaboration of academics and industry leaders, really be able to create this model. And then we were able to test how the mitral valve clip would fit into the heart, and then be able to treat people who were suffering.
And so the idea is that your product you can fail faster, right? You can fail faster in silico than you can in vivo, is really the idea, right? You can figure out what does and doesn't work without having to go through a trial.
The failing faster has never been a strong selling point, I don't think, but I think it's
well, isn't that how you succeed, though, right?
No, but it typically is about designing a program that's going to succeed, right? So you just run the experiment in silico. So the example of like the mitral clip in the living heart, you understand what geometry of the mitral valve your clip is best designed to address. And you also know how to measure things like surrogate endpoints, so things like cardiac output, and how those will be related to something like a 6-minute walk test, which is ultimately, or long-term survival, which is what ultimately would be the most beneficial. And you get to test that whole continuum in silico. And obviously there's failure, but the goal is to actually have basically an intelligent design
What
process.
I meant is you don't fail in an expensive clinical trial. You fail in a simulation, and then you fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one exciting prospect here, though, is for marketed products. You were talking about the ability to figure out safety issues. Dr. Marks and Adam were talking about the CAR-T issue, where we have this cancer treatment that is also causing some rare cases of cancer. How would you go about using these technologies to figure out how often that might be happening?
So we've been working a lot in cell therapy, and this has been, much of this has been published with academic collaborators, and we've really focused on safety because all trials are underpowered from a safety perspective. There are many ways to be unsafe. There's usually only one way to be effective, and most CAR T developers, we looked at this about a year ago. The median number of patients that they had treated was 12. And there were a few developers that had hundreds or thousands of patients they treated. They had that experience, but when you're only treating 12 patients, then you experience an adverse event. It can be very difficult to understand whether that is something that is common within patients who have that particular type of disease, within patients who are treated in those care settings, or if it's something like a class effect, or if it's specific to the product that you're developing. So we give sponsors access to these aggregated data sets, and we allow them to basically understand whether the effects that they're seeing are statistically probable. And if they are found to be statistically probable, hopefully through tools like the Living Heart, we actually give them that mechanistic understanding of what might be causing it.
Wow, that could obviously make things a lot better. Literally, you're talking about thousands of patients in trial, but some of these side effects are 1 in 1,000, right? So you really might not pick them up. Really exciting stuff. So if someone out there is working in a clinical trial program and they want to start working with these kinds of data sets, aside obviously from calling you, but what are kind of the first steps to starting to think in this new way?
I think one of the few things that at least I've learned through my journey is really looking for opportunities to improve the current workflows. And this is something that we really saw with the Living Heart project, where you have these traditional pipelines of how things have been going, but you can use the latest technologies to really augment and accelerate these traditional pipelines so that you can get to your endpoints much faster. So I think continuously looking at the trends in technology, but then really trying to look for opportunities in your traditional workflows to accelerate the current pipelines.
Yeah, and one of the general challenges that I see when we talk to potential customers is there's sort of an overwhelming fatalism in a lot of drug development, that you sort of get an asset at a particular stage. There's a lot of money bet on it. There's a lot of pressure to confirm what people have thought. It's very difficult to say, well, everyone has thought this drug would be good for X, but it's really good for Y, or maybe we need to change our plan. One thing that we always work with sponsors, and to be honest, we work a lot with academics to do this, is to try to sort of identify the unanswered questions around the margins. Because I think that a lot of, this question of secondary malignancies with CAR T, it's to some extent scary to confront that question in phase 2 or phase 3 when you really need to deliver positive data in order to deliver on investor expectations. But our kind of position is that more information is always better. And what we try to provide is a platform for collaboration that's safe and a place where those questions can be asked, and then that information can be used to the maximal benefit of the people that want it.
So, and another interesting thing here is, and I talked about metadata at the beginning, but how does the whole DeSalt help you to do this? You've got a lot more than just the clinical trials work here now.
The way that it was described to me when I joined shortly after the acquisition. Dassault has always invested in the largest R&D industries for R&D. So initially that was automotive, then it was aerospace, and now it's life science. And they're very much committed to this idea of enabling research and development to be done more seamlessly. They're committed to this idea of sort of simulation and virtualization. And so I think that and they also have a very long-term outlook, to be honest. And that is all beneficial for us, that we can be engaged in this rather than just selling software licenses, that this is actually a strategic pillar for them to enable the ecosystem.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jacob and Afro. It was wonderful having you. And now, for our next panel, please welcome to the stage Christina Burrow, Managing Director of Arch Partners. I think I'm going to get off. It'll be easier to do this. So, thank you. So now, please welcome to the stage Christina Burrow, Managing Director of Arch Venture Partners. Matt Glein, CEO of Roivant. Dr. Ted Love, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. Myrtle Potter, President and Chief Executive of Sumitomo Pharma America. And Damien Gardet, National Biotech Reporter at STAT. This is a great session to ask a bunch of questions at. If you guys are interested in doing that in the audience, I'll be with a mic.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you all of you for being here. Thank you all of you for being here. And yeah, as Matt mentioned, I would be delighted if this were as interactive as possible, both because I'm sure you have great questions and it also means less work for me as a moderator, which is ideal. So Matt will be with the microphone. If you have a question, raise your hand and please introduce yourself once you're handed that microphone. So our remit is the year ahead, which can go in any number of directions. But I thought maybe it'd be wise to look briefly at the year behind and what it might portend. There was, in brief, a really volatile year for biotech. Everything was really bad into the fall, and then everything was really good for a multitude of reasons, but principally because of interest rates and a kind of dense period of M&A driven by larger pharma companies. And so I wonder, granted, it's the first day of JPM, the XBI is up like 5%, so everybody's happy, everything's great. But is there, Matt, I was going to ask you, as CEO of a publicly traded company, is there a frustration that what seemed to rise biotech up was these things outside of the industry's control versus, for example, as Peter Marks mentioned, the FDA approval of a CRISPR genome editing therapy, which would seem to be the kind of thing that you would want to be that which gets an outsized investor response rather than what actually did?
Yeah, I'm going to get the expression wrong, but there's that expression about give me the strength to control things that I can and to accept the things that I can't control. I guess the question is like, what's the prescription for when you can't control anything? Is I think a little bit of the moment. Yeah, look, I think it's always fun when you're running a public company and like you do things and those things cause the market to appreciate you better and the stock trades up and you're like, okay, I did that. And then it's less fun when you're the CEO of a public company, and either direction, frankly, you don't do anything and the stock trades up or down, or you do something and the stock trades the wrong direction and you're just like, wait, what am I supposed to take away from this? Look, I think one of the things that's interesting about 2023 and that sort of makes me think to the prompt about the year ahead is we live in a business where so much of what we're trying to do is generate clinical data that takes a long time, and meanwhile, like the capital cycle time and like the public sort of like the cycle time of world events is much shorter, and so you have a year like 2023 where everything was terrible, and then rates changed, and there was some M&A, and everything was great, and it had nothing to do with our clinical programs, it had nothing to do with really anything that we have control over, but it changed our fortune. So yeah, I guess frustrating is a word for it, but it's also just, it's a hard problem to figure out how to optimize in that environment.
Well, I was curious too, Christina, you at Arch invest on larger timescales generally than the kind of capital market cycles that we're talking about. How does that play into the decisions you make in founding new companies or in backing new technologies, knowing that you're likely in it for the long haul and there will be unpredictable things ahead?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I agree with everything that Matt just said. We're talking about quarterly, or you guys are talking about quarterly earnings on a regular basis. You've had to all live under that regime of, tell me what you did the last 90 days in an industry that requires patience because you're looking at multi-year clinical trials or, 5-10-year development cycles. I think when Arch is looking to invest, we're looking for impact. And I think 2023 was an amazing year for impact and an amazing year, kind of the culmination of some really phenomenal trends, including the sickle cell approval and launch of Vertex. It's just an incredible story. I think the GLP-1 space, and opening up this interest and enormous benefit to patients, this is really exciting. And 20 years ago, if you would have asked anyone here if type 2 diabetes and obesity were going to be the hot button topics at a JP Morgan conference, everyone here would have said no. No one's investing in that space, and yet here we are. We have drugs that have incredible benefit. So I look at 2023 as like, yeah, it was really rough, and 2024 might be rough too. but we're doing what the industry, we have data that says this industry can make a difference, and when Arch invests, we look to keep that bar extremely high.
So Ted, you wear a lot of hats, I know, and you serve on a lot of boards, but one of the things that you do is with Bio, working in Washington on the industry's behalf. 2024 is a presidential election year, as everyone in this room is probably aware. Those tend to be volatile experiences for the biotech industry, and so I'm curious, going into that, what is the tone of conversations you've had with lawmakers? What are the kind of priorities you're heading into, and what should we expect with respect to how this industry is going to be affected by what will be probably a very interesting and perhaps frustrating year of campaigning?
Yeah, I do think it is going to be potentially a frustrating year, because in a political year, you tend to get a lot of politicians saying things that they think will generate support for their candidacy, not necessarily things that they can do or will do. So I think this year is going to be a lot about rhetoric and likely very little about any actual change. But the rhetoric is going to be there, and that could affect our industry for sure. I think there's some positive things going on as well. I mean, I think the interest rates are going to be good for us. I think there's been, as we've all seen, a significant flow of M&A. I think that's going to continue. In fact, in many ways, IRA may be driving some of the M&A that we're seeing. So I think we're going to have some positive tailwinds, but I think politically we should be prepared for significant headwinds, mostly around rhetoric, and I would encourage people not to overreact to that, because I think that stuff is really going to be more for television and for voters than for actual substance.
Well, Myrtle, I wanted to ask you about technology. It feels like, at least from a distance, that the biggest event at JP Morgan, at least today, was the NVIDIA presentation. And from hearing it and reading about it, I'm not sure I totally wrap my head around exactly what all the enthusiasm is about, but you run a large, diversified pharmaceutical company, and so it's part of your job to deduce which technological things that are put in front of you are actually useful and are mostly just hype. So I'm curious, how do you navigate that? How do you implement shiny new objects that emerge from Silicon Valley and not fall prey to things that might be more hype than they are substance?
Yeah, so really carefully and really thoughtfully. You know, I'm really fortunate. One of the things that my company has are two computational analytics platforms that were actually built while they were at Roivant. We've scaled them and improved them and taken them to the new level since we took these companies and bought them in a transaction with Roivant. But I can tell you, we are really doing very serious things with deep learning and with machine learning. And one of the ways I can tell the difference is because I actually know a lot about AI. I actually have 3 machine learning patents myself that I'm the sole inventor of. And so one of the things that allowed me to do is, number one, make sure I was convinced myself about the technologies that we have now in our portfolio, number one. Number two, it allowed me to really be thoughtful about building out the team and capabilities, and also make sure that we were doing things that could be scaled to benefit the business, as opposed to chasing shiny objects. And in fact, I have been so committed to this that the chief digital officer in my company reports directly to me, as opposed to reporting way down in the bowels of the organization, whether it's 3 levels down in an IT department or whatever. So we're doing things like, for example, using deep learning and machine learning to get an early insight on symptoms and treatment effect in our trials. We're using AI with our sales organization. We're deploying chatbots to help them plan and implement their day-to-day jobs. Those chatbots refer back to data that we have internal inside the company, and the difference that it's made in their effectiveness has been really, really huge. So AI, it's real, it is here to stay, and I think those who can figure out the pathway to deploy it, it will make them smarter and help companies make better decisions.
So I just want to make sure I'm not skipping over anyone in the crowd. The FTC, why don't we just broach that? So it exists, probably you're all aware, and has taken a particular interest in this industry, and there have been challenges to mergers that were probably not unexpected, and some have been successful, and some have been not. But there was one instance, and I'm assuming nobody here has non-public information, but in which they challenged the licensing deal in Pompe disease, which was what seemed like a relatively quotidian biotech licensing deal where a large company, Sanofi, struck a deal with a smaller company, and that got challenged by FTC, leading it to be abandoned. I wondered, I mean, Matt, I assume a lot of the conversations you're having here are of the business development variety. Does that change the calculus? Did that shift kind of the thoughts about regulatory risk for a company like yours, seeing what happened there?
Yeah, first of all, we may also want to hear from Christina on this topic, because I think she's unfortunately maybe close to that situation. But look, I think it's obviously a consideration, and it's something that, look, they want it to be a consideration, right? Like, the reason they're doing this is to ask us to think about it every time we do a deal. I think we currently at Roivant have the general privilege of being a development stage company. Mostly, we have a commercial program, but it's one, and it's in a field with a lot of other entrants, so it's not a particularly sort of hot topic area for the FTC as best we can tell. Which I think provides us some cover versus some of the big pharma companies that have been squarely in their sights. I think it's interesting from the outside that the deal they succeeded in interfering with was a license for Pompe disease, and the disease they did not succeed in, the transaction they did not succeed in interfering with was Amgen buying Horizon. I just think, if you look at the contrast between those two things and you think about what it means for the 50,000 people wandering around Union Square right now, it's just an interesting question. I think our general feeling on early stage licensing collaborations is we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to be thoughtful, and we're going to make sure we have good advice, and we're going to press on and hope that we either, and maybe this is not a great thing to say on a panel in front of hundreds of people, but either stay under the radar or don't run afoul of anything. What do you think the radar is? It's been a really interesting piece of backdrop. It's a little bit like, and this is an unpopular thing to say maybe, but it's a little bit like the IRA for a biotech company, in the sense that you are aware of these giant pieces of political machinery in motion, and you feel a half a step removed from it, because look, I think a lot of the stuff that the IRA is doing, it clearly will have a ton of impact on investment, it will have a ton of impact on how we make decisions, but it doesn't impact me day to day. I'm not sitting there thinking, what if my drug winds up on the Medicare negotiation list? We're not there. And I think it's similar on the FTC. Most of the deals that we're thinking about doing are far enough from the heart of it, but also it's clearly got a chilling effect, and it clearly makes us and everybody else think twice. So it's a tough combination.
So I actually do probably have some material, non-public information.
This is the
about
place,
it.
I think, to share it. Yeah.
And like Peter, I'm gonna not share that, but I'll do his approach of kind of what the lawyers would tell you. But I think that there were some peculiarities of that circumstance that made it highly unusual. So I don't think it should have the chilling effect that every phase 1 deal is going to meet this kind of outcome. I think there were some unique mitigating circumstances at play here. But I would say this. It is very clear that this is largely a political agenda. It's a political agenda about trying to look like you are protecting the American public from the big bad pharmaceutical industry. And I do know people who've been in meetings with the FTC, and what I've universally heard is that there's absolutely no concept of concern for the patient. There's absolutely no concept that a phase 1 drug is extremely unlikely to even get approved. There's no concept of what these kinds of delays mean in terms of the life impact on a patient with Pompeii or anything like that. So I regard all of that, quite frankly, as very negative. But I would just go back to the beginning and say, I think there were some mitigating circumstances that were unique here, and we shouldn't all feel like we're not going to be able to do phase one deals in the future.
Well, yeah, Christine, I mean, is that a chilling effect that you feel, or has it been seemingly from your perspective as you look at companies, and obviously these kind of deals are the lifeblood of small biotech companies in so many cases, that this was in fact kind of an isolated incident?
I hope it's an isolated incident. I would agree with Matt. It's sort of, it's the car accident, right? It could happen at any time. Like, these things can happen, and we've had other situations where the FTC has given us heat. But I think we think about this we do think about the patient. We are thinking about the impact. And, it might make a difference at the margins of some future board meeting when we talk about which partner is the best. But I don't think it's impacting day-to-day decisions. Now, what is interesting is between the FTC and the IRA and some of the other political verbiage, it does feel like this industry is under increased scrutiny. And there was a number of years ago, I was on a panel shortly after we were all let back out of our homes, talking about, look, we as an industry are very proud of the fact that we delivered vaccines that could let people go back to live normal lives. And I said, it will take a while, maybe a year, maybe two, but we'll be demonized again. And we may even be demonized for the success of the vaccine. Anyone who's seen Superman, the original, with Christopher Reeve, it's an amazing movie, will know, or read any Greek mythology, will know that the hero is always brought back down to earth. And I think, one of the things I'm most concerned about is, and thank goodness Ted is now leading the charge here, is that this industry is designed to protect human health. Now, how is it that we've become like the bad guys? So I think reminding ourselves what that means and what the priorities are, reminding the nation and the world, like, we are here to help people, and then actually following up on that, and not doing things like ridiculous price increases and Me Too, drug, follow-ons, but, queuing up real success. So.
Well, it's become kind of a cliche that I'm going to employ now, but for years and years and years, I've been hearing people say this industry is very bad at telling its own story, and pointing to that as part of the means for what you're describing, Christina. Myrtle, what should the industry be doing differently or more or whatever to better reach people who, for example, as he was saying about FTC meetings where people don't have maybe the basic concepts of what's going on here? What is the process for changing that? I know that's a big question. I don't expect you to have a 10-point plan, but.
No. So, the work that we do is really hard. It is really, really hard. And I think I've learned the hard way myself with one of our approvals that we got in 2021, that this was approval for a tissue therapy product for children born with congenital athymia. And we got a negative response from the FDA. Drug wasn't approved. We had to go back and back and back again. And it was a lesson in how much it really is our responsibility to educate the regulators about our business, what we do, the impact we have, and the value that we bring to patients. And, I've been in the industry for a long time. I've had statins approved and antihypertensives approved, et cetera, but here we were with the FDA talking about a very rare disease, ultra-rare disease. Only 20 to 25 children are diagnosed every single year. Talk about education. I can't tell you the reams of documents that we had to produce. One of the businesses in my portfolio today is a gene therapy product. The FDA is still grappling and getting its arms around gene therapies. The things that we are doing to help educate and teach about what they do, how they work, how to manufacture, why our manufacturing approaches are sound and good, why this product for patients with cystic fibrosis could really be life-changing for them. the burden is super, super high. So I think as we look to drive innovation and not do Me Too products, the onus is on us to advance our science, advance our innovation, and to get into the mode of teaching. It's just simply not going to go away.
I guess I'll also, because I think the folks on this stage will do an admirable and appropriate job sort of defending our industry against the onslaught, I guess one comment, I do think another thing it's incumbent on us just to acknowledge is we do pretty well. I mean, like, pharma companies do earn significant profits. There is, as evidenced just walking around Union Square this week, a lot of money swirling around this industry, and money for good reason, right? We get to work on things that improve human health, and we get to earn generous rewards for it. And I do think we maybe don't acknowledge that quite as often as it would behoove us to, in sort of putting up the, look, I think it's immediate in many cases, right? A regulation passes that is designed to address a social issue that people outside of the four virtual walls of this conference experience as real, and the industry just puts up a phalanx, right? Like, everyone's shields go up, the pundits run to Twitter, and it's this whole spiel about how, like, we are really important and no one gets it and everyone's attacking us. And I understand the impulse, because I think, look, there's a lot of people who have dedicated their lives to improving patients through developing drugs, and every time the rules change and the politics closes in, I think, like, it makes people nervous that projects that even like individual projects that they've spent years or decades advancing are going to, like, fall out of favor because of some regulatory change happening hundreds of miles away. But I think it's worth it to acknowledge the real problems that are that those regulations are designed to solve. And I'm not sure we take enough ownership of those problems, of, like, the actual experience of a patient who is sick, goes to the pharmacy, tries to get a prescription filled, and is told that their copay is going to be $900 and can't afford to pay it. I mean, that's real. And whether the solution is the IRA, or whether the solution is some other piece of regulation, or whether the solution is better behavior by the industry, or whether there is no solution, I don't think we necessarily take quite the level of ownership over the actual experience of those problems that people have outside of our industry that we could.
I mean, we've kind of been served a difficult situation. Having said that, I think we have an amazing industry. I think, as has been, Matt said, it's really a privilege to be in this industry. And I think we've just got to continue to do what we do and tell our story. Because I think the truth is that, I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Extraordinary Measures. And, that's a real story. And that's the real CEO of Bio. We're going to be telling that story over and over and over again. Politicians relate to that. It's easy to hate someone if you don't know them, if you don't understand them, and you don't relate to them. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to do, is tell our story better. And particularly the small companies, honestly. It's much easier for politicians to relate to the emerging companies than to the bigger companies. And and Christina, you said it. I mean, we've done some stupid things. I mean, we've done egregious price increases. We've done patent thickets that basically milked the cow long before, it should have been over, long beyond when it should have been over. And those, what's that line about, it takes a life to build a reputation and you can lose it in 30 seconds. And, we've got to clean that up. But I think, I would just come back to that. I think this is an amazing industry. We all know that. As long as we continue to do what we do, stop making the stupid mistakes that we've made in the past, and tell our story, I think we're going to be fine.
We've got a question, and the mic works.
Thank you. Hi, Lisa Gusta from Global X. I'm curious, we're speaking to sort of the PR standpoint of healthcare, right? And particularly from an investment standpoint, perhaps whether distrust of the industry or how long it takes for things to materialize, or even like the news flow of a gene therapy treatment gets approved and it costs multiple millions of dollars, right, has a sort of negative tone to it from a generalist investor. What do you think are tangible things we can expect this year that perhaps might help sort of turn that story around, that might put healthcare again in a more positive light, not more broadly, but again, from an investment standpoint, what are you hopeful for in 2024?
Well, I'll just say from the bio perspective, one of the things I'm definitely learning very well is that going into a senator's office and saying, you guys are idiots, you passed RA, it's killing our industry, it's existential, that doesn't get you anywhere. What may get you somewhere is to go in and say, look, we share a lot of common objectives. We want innovation. We want to reduce the morbidity and mortality of egregious diseases. We want those therapies to be highly available. These are things that we all care and align on. This is very different than the tobacco industry, where quite frankly, they just want you to go away. They don't actually want us to go away. The difference in our situation is we need to agree upon how to achieve generally the same objectives that we want to achieve. So I'm a big proponent of lowering out-of-pocket cost. I actually think, the patient doesn't care that the gene therapy costs $2 million. What they care about is their out-of-pocket costs, and that's what they should care about. Nobody cares about bypass surgery cost. What you care about is the bill you get when you go home from your bypass surgery. So we've got to drive the costs to the patient down. If we do that, the accessibility of these products will increase. And quite frankly, our capacity to charge less would be greater because we would spend all of our time trying to overcome all the barriers to the patient getting access to therapies that will help them lower their future medical costs. So I'm optimistic, but we are going to have to approach things in a much more collaborative way than sometimes we approach them, I think.
In part, if the question's about generalist investor perceptions of our industry, I'll just remind people, generalist investors are largely outside of our bubble, and the impression that generalist investors had of biopharma in 2023 was a direct correlation of how much Novo and Lilly stock they owned. And the ones that owned more have a great impression of our industry, and the ones that own less had a worse impression of our industry. And I guess that to me is actually, in some ways, the single most optimistic statement about 2024 we can make, which is that cutting through the IRA, cutting through basically everything, the answer is like two large pharma companies are marketing a therapy that works for a lot of people and improves their health. And the impression that generalists have of our industry is 100% of the function of how well that is working. So I do think, looking forward to 2024, if we can replicate that anywhere, if we've got any other tools for creating a similar vibe, if we can make that Roivant, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, Myrtle, I was curious. When it feels like all anyone talks about external to this little bubble is Wegovy, Ozempic, whatever the Lilly one's called, Zepbound, and it drives headlines and it obviously drives stock prices, and obviously there's something of a halo effect on the whole industry. But is there a downside to that when you're working outside of that space and trying to get attention perhaps from generalist investors or even just from society at large?
Oh my God, there is no downside to this. No, I am cheering those companies on. Number one, those products have been so great for patients, right? When you think about the struggles with obesity and what has worked and what hasn't worked, for us to have therapies that actually make a difference for patients, my God, that's why we all came into this business, right? And then number two, to see the potential for the products to have impact in broader areas. I want one. I want a GLP-1. There's not a CEO in the business that doesn't want one.
If you look under your chair, it's also you each.
Oh my
Is
goodness.
it a dose or a patent? Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So if you've talked to anyone who has taken these products, they will tell you that they have transformed their lives, right? And so when you tie obesity to cancer, to heart disease, to on and on and on and on and on, yeah, let's just cheer on our peers and work hard not to be too covetous of what they've got going.
And the cardiovascular risk reduction is out of proportion with the weight reduction.
Absolutely,
So people
it's
lose a certain amount of
huge.
weight, but their cardiovascular benefit and the future healthcare savings benefit is going to be phenomenal with these therapies. This is the kind of thing we should be so proud of. It's like Lipitor, it's like Crestor. that has dramatically changed the landscape of healthcare. That's what we do. And then our drugs become basically free because they go off patent. And who else does that? Does any car become free? Any iPhone? I mean, we do this, and that's our contract with society that we should live up to.
Yeah,
And what a wonderful moment that patients are talking positively about the drug industry, right? You talk about being demonized and being criticized, et cetera. Now we've got patients going to their employers saying, please change my health plan so I can get access to these products so that I can improve my health and wellness. We haven't seen that since perhaps, the advent of the HIV drugs. There hasn't been a class of drugs where patients were rushing and running to get access to therapies. So.
Oh, I totally, and I think, one of the big trends over the last year or two has been the movement back into general population. I mean, look, I have drugs that, serve very ultra rare, and I have a hard time calling into some of the board meetings because you hear the stories of these pediatric patients, and it feels incredible to actually get drugs approved in that sector, but to have impact on tens of millions of people, if not more, I mean, that's why I got in this industry, was to cure the diseases that I saw around me every day. But to Ted's point, try turning on your iPhone 3 and see how that goes for you.
Exactly.
Was there? No. We only have 2 minutes left. I don't want to harp on GLP-1 because, again, it is the only thing anyone talks about. But it did strike me, though, Ted, as you mentioned, the long-term benefits and the case to be made for paying for it, that one of the complications is, so these GLP-1 medicines are a coup for the industry. The data is all great. But the difficulty, because of the way the system works, so for example, if I have, weight loss product X and I can guarantee, or I have data backing up that a person who would have had a heart attack at 65 will not, or delay it or whatever. If I'm making that case to a payer right now, they can say, well, that's great. You've saved money for Medicare. That's not, that isn't enough of an inducement for me to reimburse for this drug now. And I guess, I wonder, the GLP-1 seem like such a good example of both what the industry can do and also what the barriers are that still remain, because despite this sort of universal acclaim for the data, I shouldn't say universal acclaim, but despite the powerful data they've demonstrated, actually getting these drugs paid for has become a serious challenge for those companies.
Well, and when I was on the panel earlier today, I said very bluntly, we have a health care system problem. We don't have a drug pricing problem. We said that the hepatitis C drugs are too expensive. Who's saying that now? How much money are we spending on hepatitis C now? We made that investment. We cured those people. They're living. They're living normal lives, and they're no longer consuming healthcare costs. Same with cardiovascular disease. Same is going to be true with obesity-driven diseases. We are driving down healthcare costs. If we could get the system to go ahead and make the long-term investment and stop complaining about, you're hurting my budget today, and I don't care about the budget 10 years from now. But that's the silo thinking of our healthcare system. And unfortunately, I don't think the biotech and the pharmaceutical industry can alone solve that. I think we can engage with people who can maybe help us collectively solve it. But that's really our problem. It's not drug prices. We have a system where people are making more money on Merck's products than Merck.
That's kind of a dour ending, but that is all the time we have. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks to all our speakers on that panel and to Dr. Marks, to Adam and Damien. Come to our other events, come to our summits. If you're applying, say you were here, and I said to apply. Thanks to everyone for sharing your expertise. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, Dassault Systems, and our supporting sponsor, the New York City Economic Development Corporation. There's more food. The bar's open for an hour. Stay a bit, hang out, get to know each other. Bug your favorite stat reporters. Have an amazing night. Good luck at your next cocktail party and the one after that.